differences between groups can be seen in their reactions to war. In 1914, the Women's Social and Political Union stops all its campaigning for votes and decides to work alongside the government, people they've been not victimising, I suppose. They've been trying to hurt all these years, and they decide to work alongside them to try and call for things like conscription into the armed forces for men. They were women who organised giving out white feathers. In Britain, women who gave out white feathers, they gave them to men who refused to fight, and it was sort of seen as a sign of cowardice, and it was like a really horrible thing to do, and they were organised. It was organised by members before this. What's different about the East London Federation of Suffragettes is that instead of working saying, oh yeah, let's go to war, they set up things like unemployment bureaus. They gave out free milk and they did things like childcare. They tried to better the wage gap between men and women, especially as women were now entering places in work that weren't been taken by them. Again, the Suffragette newspaper, which had been called Votes for Women, was named Britannia, and it's like, well, they've dropped, and they're trying to do anything they can. They're going to any means to try and get the vote for this small minority. So 1918 is the first measure of women's enfranchisement in England, in Britain. This is the Representation of the People Act, where women over 30 who are on the government register or met the property qualifications previously imposed on men were granted the vote. Women made up about a third of the electorate at this point. More women were enfranchised than they've been aiming for. But what's quite interesting to note is that after this happened, these public figures who've been in the limelight for the past couple of decades just completely drop out. They say, all right, well, we've got the vote for some women, we're not going to keep campaigning for women in other sectors. Okay, so what I said at the start is I was trying to work out, well, how could this be just due to the exploits of a few elite women, and what were working class women doing at this point? A group that I discovered upon reading the book One Hand Tied Behind Us, which is the only book written about this group, are called the Radical Suffragettes. These women were also from the north, which is where the WSP was originally founded. They were made up of loads and loads and loads of working class women, or women whoever wanted to join in. They advocated things like birth control, wider social reforms, and adult suffrage. What they found campaigning a lot harder than the women in the suffragettes because they had to work, they had to look after their children, and their contribution in the home and in work was so fundamental to keeping their children fed and things like that. And woman says, no course can be won between dinner and tea, and most of us who were married had to work with one hand tied behind us. Working class women within this group were then given a sort of platform to express their views that they'd never had in the area of suffrage before. Helen Silcott, for example, who was just your average mill worker, was really great, and she raised the issue of female suffrage at the notoriously hostile trade union conference in 1901. And this led to the trade union conference calling for a motion for adult suffrage to encompass both men and women, due to what she said in her speech. She said one of the reasons the government didn't enfranchise women was that they said that they were sufficiently protected by their husbands, and their husbands could vote for them. Why do they need two votes? They're just going to vote for the same people. But she said that not all women were married, and she points out that the vote would give women a means to step up and to better themselves in their lives, their social lives, their domestic lives, their day-to-day experiences, and it would enable them to live and not merely to exist. Selina Cooper, I think, is an example of a woman just from the social class, of working class, who was really given opportunity she never had before due to the works of the group. The group, all these different women, were trying to, instead of going for sensationalist activities to raise the issue on a national level, get it in the newspapers, they were running a grassroots campaign, trying to get trade unions involved, women's cooperative girls involved, things like that, and try and bring into the ideas and the minds of working class women and women all over the country what getting the vote for them could mean. It was different. She became the first working class woman to be elected as a poor law guardian, they sort of looked after impoverished people, and was the only working class woman who was chosen to present a petition to Parliament on women's suffrage to the Prime Minister Asquith. Again, what I've said there, the radical suffragists were suffragists because they couldn't be militant. There were examples of them throwing bricks and things like that, but they were mainly constitutional. The things that they do, their methods were they'd sit outside their mills and just try and get women to sign. And they did manage it, and they managed to have a petition of over 60,000 names of working class women to try and bring on and gain suffrage for women in England. This is like a real important thing, I think, what the point that Selina Cooper said. She said, women do not want their political power to enable them to boast that they are on equal terms with men. They want it for the same purpose as men, to better conditions, make the loss of the worker pleasanter. We do not want it as a mere plaything. The radical suffragists, other groups, working class groups in the north, obviously had a lot of friction between the mainstream women's social and political union suffrage campaign, because they just couldn't understand what was the point in them trying to just get the vote and not letting their members involve themselves in other social reforms and social struggles. Okay, so it's really important to see that women from all over the country, all their different classes, contributed to the effort of gaining enfranchisement for women. As I said, over 60,000 women signed that one petition, and that's just from the north of England. There were petitions all over the place. It wasn't just the exploits of a couple of well-known public figures that got women the vote in 1918. I think Christabel and the WSP movement was a struggle for more privileged and educated women to take their seat in government and represent their class interests. And I think the differing views of Christabel and Sylvia really sum up the different ideas and approaches from different social circles to the question of suffrage and what it could mean and what its potential was. Then for Sylvia, the East London Federation of Suffragettes, the radical suffragists and other working class groups, the suffrage movement was the struggle for freedom from want, poverty and oppression, and they saw enfranchisement as a stepping stone to social reform.